Lynda, you can start.
Okay. So welcome everyone. This session is sharing gratitude with your users at Automation Dreaming. We're getting near the end. This is one of the last sessions. I'm Lynda Kane. I'm currently the senior Salesforce developer at the Amherst Group. I also serve as co-leader of the Cleveland Developer Group. I host our local Salesforce Saturdays here in Cleveland, and I serve as a facilitator for Girls Who Code Club at our local library. I have 11 certifications, 18-time ranger on Trailhead. Yes, all the badges, unless new ones came out today, except for one super badge that I'm just saving to do when I'm ready. And there's my connection information, which will also be shared at the end as well. Outside of Salesforce, when I have time, I like to go geocaching and I do a lot of crafts. So today's topic is gratitude, sharing gratitude. And our use case, there was a study done at UC Berkeley around, I think it was 2018. Anyway, it showed that workers felt valued and cared for 43. And when they felt valued and cared for, they were 43% more effective and productive than those that did not. So our use case today is a smart informed manager at our company has asked that users see a random statement to let them know that the company appreciates their work every time they log into Salesforce. So our basic process with the sharing gratitude is that the user logs into Salesforce. Every time they log in, they're taken to their homepage, and behind the scenes, a message of gratitude is selected from a list of possible messages and surfaced via a flow. That user sees that message very clearly. They feel appreciated and therefore are more productive while they're working. To build this out, we're going to need some configuration and some code. So the first is creating that custom object to store the messages of gratitude. We're going to have to create an Apex class along, of course, with the test class so we can eventually get this in production to randomly select one of those messages. We're going to need a screen flow to display that message, and then we're going to add that flow to the homepage and make sure all the applicable permissions are assigned to the users. I'm going to go through this configuration through the slides. I have a slightly modified demo of this when we're done, so I can show you the pieces that were set up. There just is not enough time to show you the actual setup. So that custom object, you're just going to create a new custom object. I called mine Thanksgiving because it's easy and the plural is the same as the singular. I'm going to use an auto number field so that I don't have to worry about naming my records. In this case, I'm just using TS for Thanksgiving statement and starting my numbering at 0. And I want to choose that box to launch the custom tab wizard. When I create that tab wizard, I'm making it hidden for all profiles except for system administrator, which I'll make it default on. And then if I'm going to have users who are going to help me manage those statements, I'll probably add visibility for them via a permission set afterwards. In this object, I only need one custom field. I'm going to call it statement. I've set this in my org as a text of 255, but if you want to be able to use longer statements, you can use long text. But I would probably try to max this at no more than 1,000 characters, and that's probably still a lot long, especially since you wanted something that a user can read very quickly. I'm going to include the field in the page layout, so I'll be able to update them. And then for data, I'm going to add several messages, especially for functional testing at the beginning. I want to have at least 3. And just here's some examples that I've used in the org that I've set up. So things like, thank you for partnering with our team to ensure data is accurate and complete. You're the reason we're successful. And we see you smiling, and it warms our heart. So the next piece after I've got my object built and I've got some data in it is to create my flow. I'm sorry, not my flow, my Apex class. Since flow can't just grab a random record, at least there's no functionality for it so far, I just need to use Apex. When you're using Apex with flow, you have to remember that the method needs to be invocable. Invocable methods return. Their return variable is always a list. If you have parameters coming in, that also has to be a list. But just keep in mind, a list can just have one item in it. It's still a list. So the actual class, and I apologize if this is a little small on the screen. I know Bevy, we don't have as much ability to control that. But you can see I've declared my class as public. I have that invocable method before my method call, and this is static because I'm not really, and I'm returning a list. I have no parameters that I'm sending in. I'm just getting my statement. I'm figuring out how many records I have to choose from. So I'm running a query to get the count of records from that object. If you want to get a little more advanced with this, you might have like a status field to determine whether you want those particular statements active or not. So you can kind of control which statements appear at various times. After I've figured out how large the pool is I have to choose from, I need to figure out which record I want. So I'm using creating this offset variable that's using math random, which selects a number between 0 and 1, multiplying it by the size, so the number of records that are out there in the object, using another math function floor to get a single value, and then taking the integer value of that number so that I've removed the decimals. And then finally, I query Thanksgiving again to create my list where I just get that one statement. So I'm limiting my query by 1, using that offset value to pick just that one record randomly. I could include a sort here to guarantee it always sorts the same way, but I'm letting Salesforce handle that, so it's all done. Then my test class, because obviously if I ever want to get this to production, I have to have my code coverage. So I'm setting up my test. My setup test is fairly simple. I am starting out by creating new statements, and in this case, I'm creating 5 of them through a loop. They're a very basic statement. I'm grateful for you. And then I'm adding a number at the end just so that I know that they're different. And I'm inserting that. That's the test setup. And then the actual test method. First, I'm querying that object and I'm seeing how many statements did I create. Did I create the 5 I expected to for my setup? Just checking that. I start my test. I get a random statement. I stop my test and I check to make sure it only gave me 1. It's pretty simple. Make sure I cover my code. If I wanted to, I could also assert that that statement starts with the text. Hopefully there's nothing else in there, and there shouldn't be when I'm running a test because I'm starting from no data other than what I created in my test setup. The next piece, so I've got my object, I've got my Apex class, now I can create my flow. This flow is very simple. It's only got 2 elements. It's got the action where I call that Apex class and then store the resulting record variable. And it's got the screen where I present it to the user. So that action class, I'm going to choose action. I'm going to search for my Apex class. As long as I've included that @invocable method, it should show up. It'll say like Apex dash and the name of your class. You'll notice that in this example in the image I have, there is nothing really to set because that particular class, we didn't include any inputs or parameters. But I am having to expand the advanced to manually assign the variable. And I'm storing it in a new variable that's a record variable. And the object, I'm specifying the object and I'm giving it a name. And in this case, I've just called it my statement. Then in my screen, in the settings for the screen, I'm turning off the header and the footer. I don't need those on there. The user doesn't need to, submit anything, doesn't need to go to a next because there's only the one screen. And then I'm choosing a display text where I'm just adding that output variable because I'm storing it in a record called my statement. I have to do my statement and then get to the actual field. In this case, this field, as we set it up, was called statement. I format it to make it stand out a little bit more. So make it a little larger, bold it, add some color. Purple's kind of my preferred, but use whatever color you like or one that goes with the brand of the organization you're with. Before I talk about adding the flow, the last thing I do obviously is I test that flow, make sure it works, make sure it's activated and saved properly. And then I'm ready to consider and add it to my Lightning page. So in this case, I'm going to surface it in the home page. So I'm going to go to the home tab. I'm going to edit that page. I'm going to use the standard flow component, drag it in place where I want it on the screen, select the gratitude flow I created, save it, and test it. And I also need to test it as a user. The first time I tested, I found my user can't see it. So possibilities for what I had to do could be the object, could be the Apex class, or could be that they don't have access to flow. So as I'm adding that, I have to remember that my users need their rights as well. So I have to make sure either the profile or permission set that I have for that user has access to that Apex class, not the test class, just that controller class we created. They need read access on that custom object. It can still be tab hidden so that they can't get to it through the menus or the app launcher, but at least that profile or permission set needs read access on that object and specifically on the statement field in case it wasn't already granted. The user needs run flow, or that profile permission set will need the use flow permission. And then if I have users who are going to manage statements for me so that I don't have to do it myself, they will need additional access like read, write, and then their tab would have to be default off or on so that they can actually get to it. Now I'm going to, before I move on with my slides, just hop off and give sort of a walkthrough of what I built out rather than, so you can kind of see it in the org. So the first thing is that object. Don't have enough time to fully build it out for you, but so I pre-built it, but I called it Thanksgiving. And when I go to the fields, you can see here that I've got a statement field that is text 255. And I've got my usually, object name field I've renamed to number, and it's an auto number. And I did set my tab. Somehow I used castle, but that's okay. And I've added some statements here. And we're going to add one more statement really quick so you can see that. So my last statement is thank you for joining us for automation training. We'll see if it comes up for us. But so we now have 7 statements available. This one's here. I did have to modify my all views so that I could actually see some text rather than just the number. But the next step, obviously, we talked about was that Apex class. So I've already brought it in. So exactly as I showed you, it exists here, as well as the test class. And before I started this, I quickly ran my test run so that I could confirm that it was successful, that my asserts are successful, and then that I have my code coverage as I need to be able to deploy this later. Finally, the last piece is to build that flow. And I have pre-built it, even though it's short and quick, so I can demo some parts of this. So you can see it has just those 2 statements. It's a screen flow. Pretending I haven't already added this in, just so you can see what it's like. I search for action, find it here, and then I just need to search for that Apex class by its name. So I called it random gratitude controller, and you can see here it's Apex dash and the name of the class. That's on most classes that have an invocable method. Just recall you can only have one invocable method per class. And I'm just going to open this up so you can see what it looks like. Like I said, when I first call it up, there's nothing to set because it has no parameters. And it's in the advanced tab that we need to add some stuff. And it's manually assigning that a variable, creating that record variable that I'm going to store it in. And then finally my screen, which again, my overall screen, I just called it statement 1 to give it an API name, but I turn off that header. I turn off that footer. And then I use display text to share that resource and format it so it'll look better. I save and activate it. Hopefully I've debugged it, tried it, tested it, made sure it worked, and showed me a statement. And then the next thing is just placing it within my page layout. So I've already placed it within my home page, and you can see I'm getting one of the messages, but when I choose this within my home page, I'm choosing the flow custom component. So just right here, this flow component, dragging it over to where I want it on the page. In this case, I'm putting it pretty much near the top. And then within here, I need to make sure that I've selected the flow that I want to display, save it, make sure it's activated for my users. And then the last piece, besides testing it for myself, is making sure that one of my users can actually see it. So here I'm going to log in as my Eagle for Mom user. And when they log in, since I made sure all my stuff, they see a statement of gratitude. So, and obviously if they refresh, they will see a different statement of gratitude. So here's our thank you for joining us that we added today. The other things I'll just note, let me just log off as this user, is in the profile I created, I did have to share the object with read access, the Apex class. And then if I was going to create users who could contribute to statements, I would use a permission set. I would give them read, edit, and create on that object, and then also turn the tab on. So quickly back to my slides here so I can finish out this part and we can get to any questions if there are any. So a similar mechanism could be used for sharing tips, sales tips for your users, or even for your call center users, reminders for how they can help best serve your customers, or things like randomly showing one record, a contact that hasn't had a last activity date in a while, an opportunity that, or a case that are going to hit their SLA or due date soon. You can use that same method of creating an Apex class to randomly select a record and then have that data display in a flow. In fact, expand on that flow so that the user can handle updating that record within it too. So one final thing, I did create a step-by-step instruction document for how to build out this flow. It's available this site. I will also paste this site in the chat. It looks like this. It's just a simple presentation site. And at the very bottom, you'll find this document that actually talks through step-by-step how to create each of the steps I went through in your org. I always recommend using a sandbox or developer org first before you do this in production. You'd actually have to, because you can't create the Apex class directly in production. So that link, and I will get it pasted in the chat. And finally, if you have any questions beyond what we have time to answer here, please feel free to reach out. I'm reachable via Twitter, LinkedIn, my email, and then the Trailhead community. I really do try to answer people as quickly as I'm able, usually within a day or two. So thank you for attending Automation Dreaming. Thank you to our hosts, Mark and Vicki, for setting up this conference, and to Akosh for helping host this particular session. I'm going to stop sharing screen, and if there's any questions, we can get them answered. So thank you for the comments. Oh my gosh. And I will share that link. I just need to grab it really quick, and I'll put it in the chat. Here you go. And for those of you watching, I know they are recording, and recordings will be made available at a later date when the hosts have had time to process and get them ready enough.